There's stuff you can do on LinkedIn where it isn't annoying. The thing that people hate is the pitch slapping. I don't like the term. It sounds unnecessarily violent. But when you connect with someone, we all do it. You kind of go, yeah, all right, I'll connect. And you kind of almost flinch waiting for the immediate sales message to ping up. And when it doesn't, that's quite a nice thing. And when the person turns out to be a human and engages with you in a way that shows that actually, this is a real little business connection I've made here. It's very subtle and almost subconscious, but it's a really nice way to be on someone's radar.
My name's Mike Lander, and you're listening to Higgle, the B2B Sales Club podcast, where we bring you actionable insights about sales RFPs, negotiations, and difficult procurement discussions from sales leaders, brand leaders, and procurement leaders. Please subscribe to get updates when new episodes are released. Matt, Steve, thanks ever so much for joining me on Higgle, the B2B Sales Club podcast. Delighted to have you.
Hi.
Thank you for having us.
We've got obviously 3 topics as usual that we're going to explore. But before that, I'd like the audience to find out, who are you? What do you do? And something unusual about yourself, if you feel like it. If you don't, it's absolutely fine. Matt, start with you because you are the next one on my list on the video.
Okay, so I'm Matt Broughton. For Sponge, I'm officially labelled as the head of client strategy, but really we both just get involved in everything. So I've been working for Sponge about 11 years now. Prior to that, the reason I'm involved is because before that I was in PR and marketing. I was the International Director of Communications for Atari for about 7 years, and then the European Marketing Director for Midway Games. And before that, I was a journalist and various other bits and bobs. And that's why my involvement in Sponge is key, is because I can represent the other side of the equation and be a harsh kind of taskmaster when it comes to how we present ourselves and our clients to the marketing world. An interesting thing about me is I'm a beekeeper. I mean, there's lots of interesting things.
Wow.
That's the one I've chosen to disclose today.
I was watching a film with Leo, our son, literally the other day, a cartoon, about what would happen if all the bees stopped producing honey.
Yeah, it's a scary thought. And there's a scary statistic about the number of bees in Britain that are only there because of beekeepers. So whereas beekeeping used to be kind of a cutesy hobby, now kind of essential because so much of the natural honeybee habitat has gone that if it weren't for all of us with our 7 hives in the back garden, then there are way less bees around. So yeah, it's quite scary. But let's bring a bit of that to the audience today.
Exactly. Steve, who are you? What do you do? And something unusual?
So I've run Sponge for 21 and a bit years. Previously, I worked for one of the big new business agencies, banging out phone calls and ringing the bell and wearing the cowboy hat after booking meetings and all that kind of stuff. And Sponge has really been something that I kind of fell into accidentally. I thought that new business was being done badly. And so I built it up with a team of people making calls and things. And then after COVID, we scaled it way back. And now it's me, Matt and Emma and a couple of contractors. And we mostly do consultancy-based stuff as well as running a bunch of campaigns for people. The unusual thing about me, crikey, there's nothing that unusual. I'm the drummer in a band and Matt's the bassist in a band, but we're in different bands.
What style of band?
So just covers band, just, Kings of Leon and the Killers and the usual stuff. Matt and I play almost identical set lists. They just play it better than us.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say the unusual thing about you was that you only wear shirts that match the colour of your face. Because it might just be my monitor, but you're looking incredibly salmon today.
Oh, really? You are, actually. No, you definitely are.
It's just the lighting. My face is its normal colour. It
doesn't look that colour normally, so please don't be put off if you can see him.
You are actually the same colour. It's a very good observation, Matt. Which brings me on to a different question before we even start the topics. So, Matt, before the call, we were saying you've probably done thousands of hours as a broadcaster of all types. What's the one thing and it is relevant because it's about podcasting, about an audio voice, about engaging an audience when they often can't see you. What's the biggest thing you've learned about broadcasting, certainly on an audio first format?
I guess, I don't know. I mean, I haven't done a lot of audio only stuff, so that's kind of hard. The thing I used to try and think to myself when I started doing TV was to have a friend, a specific friend in mind when I looked at the camera. So as I'm looking at the camera now, rather than looking at your picture on the screen, is I'd look at the camera and I'd think of a specific friend and imagine I was talking to him. Because then if I think about there's millions of people or 20 people or whatever the number might be that freaks you out, is that I would just look at it and imagine it might be Steve. And you've asked me a question, I'm just telling Steve the answer. And And
Exactly.
so that really, I guess it's the same thing as when you're talking, is I always imagine that almost no one is ever going to hear anything that I record. And sometimes I might be right and sometimes I might be wrong. But I think the key thing is to just not get hung up on the potential side of the audience. Size, should I say, of the audience, is that I've done some stuff that has very big audiences. But if I just imagine I'm talking to friend Dino or Simon, then I just do a fairly reasonable job and I sound like me and everyone goes, well, that's what we hired you for. The worst thing in the world is somebody hiring you for you and then you turn up and put on a silly voice, which I have also done in my career.
To me, that makes a lot of sense because I love the format. I've never actually thought about anyone listening to it when I record the episode. You're right. I just think I've got Matt and Steve on a recording and we've got some topics. We'll have a chat.
Yeah.
And if someone listens to it, brilliant. And if they don't, well, we've had a good chat.
And I always like to make it clear to anyone I'm interviewing, this is recorded. Like, this isn't live.
Yes.
I mean, apart from if it is, but mostly it isn't. I always say, apart from me and you and the editor, no one will ever know how rubbish we all are. People will only see the really slick edited bits.
Exactly.
Don't talk over each other. So that's why I always reiterate is there's no panic. Even though we're making a 5-minute video, if it takes 25 minutes or 45 minutes, no one will ever know. I'm certainly not going to tell anyone. So
exactly
that's always
right.
a good idea to let people know they just don't have to nail it first time.
They don't. So, questions, topics. First topic, agency self-description, the pitfalls and solutions. Why don't we have Steve first?
Well, that's something we end up spending a lot of time talking to our clients about. And the biggest problem is that agencies struggle to see what they look like from the outside. And the best people to catch them out on their descriptions and whether it's exaggerated or untrue or just irrelevant is the very prospects they're trying to talk to. There's a great book I've just finished called The Way We Talk Around Here. And it talks about the fact that when you get a new job somewhere, there's this 2-month period where everything sounds like it's foreign. You know, every acronym is odd. Every little bit of phrasing to describe the software or the process is foreign to you. And you miss things and people get frustrated with you. And then somewhere around the 2 or 3 month mark, it all just falls into place and you can't hear them anymore. They're just the way that you talk. But then when you speak to a prospect, certainly for agencies, when they speak to a prospect, they forget and they use all this language that is entirely unfamiliar to their prospects. And as well as that, they get caught up in the things that are important to them internally.
Yes.
Rather than the things that are important to a prospect externally. And so a lot of the work we end up doing with our clients is trying to make sure that they understand the way they look from the outside, because it's often incredibly different from the way they look from the inside. I mean, that's the first pitfall, is that inability, and it's almost impossible to really get over without getting someone in from the outside to know what you look like from somewhere else.
I mean, it's that kind of like strap line, you can't read the jar from the inside. And it's true, Matt, what's your view?
Well, I've always tried to get people to avoid describing themselves with a description of themselves, is because I could tell you I'm 6'5" and incredibly athletic and tremendous, but all of those things are a point of view. Whereas if you stick to the actual things that are factually verifiable, so we've had companies where they've spent weeks and weeks defining their about us and how to describe themselves, and we might say to them, define yourself by your results. Because if you could say we're the most creative agency in Birmingham, well, someone's going to challenge that. But if you go, we're the guys that elevated John West to the point where they were picked up by Waitrose, that is probably something that you can trace, or our work led to a certain increase in sales or whatever. So that's really all I've ever done, is to say that, because also that works in 2 ways. One, you can't really argue with it. You're approaching someone with that as a sell. Is if you say, hi, we really need to talk to you because we're the most creative agency in Birmingham. And I go, oh, what, another one? We've had 6 of them today.
Exactly.
You're like, we're the guys that got, put Visa on the map. You go, oh, all right, well, tell me a bit more about that. So that's really all I ever say, is that no one really cares, especially for us, because we're specialists in cold channel. No one cares about hearing about where you're based, how tall you are, how lovely you are, how on time, on budget you are. All those things are exactly the same as everyone else. So stick to the stuff that is unique to you and is factual and results-based. So that's our kind of shtick.
Yeah, saying that we were founded in 1924 in a shed in Birmingham in the back of someone's garden is like, you've lost me already. Why do I care?
And also, you don't know what people are looking for. People might say we've really got to lean on our experience, but people might not want that, because some people might see experience as jaded. You've been doing it for 35 years. Whereas similarly, if you say we've only been doing this for a year, people might see that as great, but they might also see it as a negative. So again, you kind of give people a reason to object to something about you. Whereas if you just stick to the facts, then if we were the guys that put John West on the map, maybe we're only 2 years old, maybe we're 25 years old. It kind of becomes irrelevant, and therefore you can't object to it.
I gave a talk a little while back where we talked about, I roasted people's creds live on stage, and people had sent their creds in. They'd agreed for me to do it. I wasn't just being horrible. But about 4 out of the 8 I was sent opened with what year they were founded. And I remember saying on stage, "Are you wine? Does the year matter? Is it, was there a good year for agencies? Why are you telling people that?" And then went on to explain that, just to expand on what Matt just said, the prospects, when they very first hear from a potential agency, really are in exclusory mode. They want to rule you out. They don't have time to check every agency on merit. They get far too many emails, messages on LinkedIn, things like that. That's why it's so hard to get any cut through whatsoever. So on those rare occasions where someone gives you the time of day, where maybe your subject line was good enough to get them to go, fair enough, all right, I'll have a look, or your LinkedIn message was just timely, and or whatever the reason is, the more information that isn't absolutely relevant to the thing they need to cause to happen that you give them, the more chance that you say something they go, oh, and you're done. We've had situations where we've had clients who are based in, I don't know, Manchester, and they just want to tell everyone they're based in Manchester. Yeah. And the thing is, there are some clients who'll hire you because you're based in Manchester, but the chances are they'll know who you are, and they'll know you're based in Manchester. There's probably a time you can say it in the kind of introduction that's later on, further down the line. They're still more likely to hire you because you can help them to sell more of their shoes for them or whatever it is.
And as a buyer, I was like, what relevance has you being based in Manchester got to do with me having a business problem I need solving?
Yeah, it's a rare thing. And there are examples, it does happen where they kind of say, this is for the Manchester Pride Festival, and we want an agency that's grounded in Manchester and understands
then you need cultural nuance.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's going to be part of your proposal because it's part of the commercial outcome the potential client needs to cause. Whereas if an agency then rocks up and says, based in Birmingham, and this prospect just needs a reason to exclude you, and they kind of go, oh, we're looking for someone based in London, really. So there's no benefit to it, but there is a potential downside because you give someone a nice, easy way to rule you out. Same with size. Our team of 9 people, oh, no, we need a bigger agency than that. Yeah. I once, we used to do this new biz many years ago for a fairly chunky PR agency, but, in the world of PR agencies, they were big, but they were still a relatively small company, 19 people. And we got them into a pitch for, I'm not going to say which, but a big garden brand. And the feedback came back from the first ROI that they responded to saying, oh, we're looking for a much bigger agency. And so I jumped on a call and spoke to them. And I kind of said, oh, who are you speaking to? And they described a couple of other big PR agencies with a couple of hundred people. And so I said, well, and how many people going to work on your campaign? And they said, oh, a maximum of 8. And I kind of went, well, we're 19 people, so only 11 people here won't know who you are. Whereas if you ring those other agencies, 180 something won't know who you are. And, it raised the laugh, but the point was there, and it did get them to the next stage in the pitch because all these little things are just a quick way to exclude. And so really keeping it really relevant to what the prospect is going to want to cause to happen, rather than those things that, if agencies were talking to their clients about their own messaging, they would describe as internal comms messages, your processes and where you're based and your culture and whether there's a football table. None of that matters to a prospect.
So a couple of things just to follow up on that before we move on to the next topic. As an ex-buyer, Matt, you made a very good point before about stick to the facts. So I think, okay, when I was buying, did size ever matter? The answer is yes, it did. But it's not about size. I think what a lot of agencies and suppliers make the mistake of is, we need you to be global and big. Okay, well, we're multi-regional and we're small in each region. Is that okay? They've missed the point. What I'm looking for is, I'm looking to de-risk the buy. The reason I want scale is, if you've got 500 people in each region around the world who specialize in the thing that we need to buy to solve a problem, to deliver a benefit, if 5 of your people, for some horrible reason, stop working for you, you've got 495 more who we can pick from. If you've only got 5 people in each region and 5 of them go missing, we've lost coverage. So I think it's about asking the question behind the question.
Also remember that, again, we're dealing exclusively with cold channel. So we are the beginning of the conversation. There's no conversation we have where we're not the first voice. So we don't know what someone's looking for. We might find that, but chances are we'll only find that as an objection. 95% of the time. If we find something out, it's because they said, oh, we were looking for a bigger agency, or, well, we only deal with people who are in London, or whatever it is. So, again, we've got to make sure that our first thing isn't just setting it up to be knocked down, because we don't have any information, and all we can do is kind of pin our hopes on the quality of our work.
Yeah.
And that's it. I mean, in credit to Steve, he made an excellent joke once where we encountered one agency where they were like specializing in Essex and Kent. And we were like, why? Why would you do that to yourself? And Steve suggested maybe they were pitching for like the Dartford Crossing,
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
But other than that, why would you do that? Because you've just immediately taken, it's tough enough getting any good agency into one of the big brands. So why on earth would you want to immediately label yourself? Because if we said, we really want to work with IKEA, and go, sorry, they're based in Suffolk. So as you only work in Essex and Kent, we'd love to work with you. I'm afraid so again, from our point of view, there's no point in including any information that can only work against us. And all you do is make it easy for someone to give you a reason why they don't want to talk to you today. So
exactly.
It serves no purpose.
I spoke to a guy called Andy Bounds a few weeks ago on the podcast. Do you know Andy?
The jelly effect, of course, yeah.
Yeah, amazing. And he gave me every day I'm trying to learn something. And he gave me a really simple takeaway. He said, start your conversation with the afters. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, start it with the afters. After working with me, what clients benefit from is X, Y, and Z. 10% uplift in sales, 30% increase in conversion rates, working on 20% less RFPs and winning more business, whatever it might be. Start with the afters. Same thing, Matt. Start with the afters, the results.
That's what's in it for them. It's like we always say, what's in it for them? Or Steve would say, what is a client going to have in the 13th month that they didn't have in the first month? What is it that the point of us working together is? Because it's not going to be any of the things about what year we were founded and that our office is an old toothpaste factory.
Exactly.
What will you have when you deal with this? If somebody had contacted me and said, right now, I imagine you're struggling to sell some of these units. I've got a way in which we can help get that done. You go, yes. Okay. If somebody says, I want to show you how good we are at computer-aided design. I'm like, why? And I did have agencies who would come and present to me for 45 minutes. And because I was a proper git back then, I just said, I'm really sorry, but why do I care?
Exactly.
And they thought I was being rude. But the point was, you haven't told me yet how this translates into something that serves my day.
Yep.
I've got my spreadsheet and my targets. Is how does your incredible ability to draw pictures of cats do anything for me? Because they kind of forgot to mention it. And me and Steve have sat through tons of presentations, millions of case studies. And then there was one we went to, and at the end of it, I just said, can I ask you a question? Did any of it work?
Yeah.
And they looked. They were stunned. Go, what do you mean? I'm like, well, at no point, you told me the client, you told me the brief, you told me what you did, your solution. But at no point did I find out whether, and it was brilliant. It helped boost their ratings or sell more units. And that's the thing is, most especially in the creative sector, people are quite understandably so focused on their abilities and their output that they kind of lose track of that commercial connection. And they kind of get a bit angry at us when we're not very interested in 5 pages of the artwork they created. We just want 1 page with as many numbers as possible in big greengrocer flashes saying 55% increase in sales, because that's what people are buying. They're not buying the artwork. They're buying the outcome of the artwork.
They're also buying, I think, Matt, where it didn't work. If you've got the confidence as an agency to go, we tried a few things for a client that really didn't work. Let me just explain what they are and why they didn't work. A client's going, well, we were going to try that. So dig into that a bit more. What do you mean by that? Well, we tried X, Y, Z, and we ran an experiment. And it was a test and learn experiment, and we spent 20 grand, and these are the results. But on the other side, we spent 20 grand doing this, and that really worked and generated a 5-to-1 ROI.
Certainly at pitch stage, yeah. I mean, at the very, very start, that cold outreach stage, it would be tough to get that into the messaging.
Absolutely.
But once you've got the conversation moving, alluding to the fact that you understand that not everything works and that there's a cost to it, both in money and time, but also there's benefits in what you can learn from it. It looks a lot better than appearing to be an agency that's never got anything wrong.
Exactly.
And every single thing they ever did was a success.
It's just
and
BS.
even worse, taking credit for all that success rather than understanding that the client would quite like some of that credit too for picking a great set of agencies and putting together a brilliant brief or whatever it is.
And we're not unrealistic. Quite often when we say to an agency mostly there are agencies we deal with, and we say, talk about your outcomes. They go, well, we can't claim any part. Then you go, you would be lying to say that you were the reason that IKEA's share went up. But the work you did as part of a project would have been part of that.
Exactly.
So you can take a reasonable amount of credit, because if your work didn't have an impact, you wouldn't have been employed to do that work in the first place. So I think that's the thing, is people struggle because they don't want to sound unbelievable. But if they word it in a sensible fashion alluding to the impact that your part of that campaign took. Even if all you did was made some new packaging, it still had an impact. So find what that impact is and then hang your hat on it and just let people know that you were a part of that solution.
I quite enjoy, Matt, that you and I still get quite exasperated at all the things that we can immediately see in someone's proposition that they're barely saying, and all the things that really aren't compelling or interesting that they're shouting about to everybody.
Exactly.
Because it's nice to be able to pull that apart quite quickly.
So we've got 2 more questions to cover, and I'm conscious of the time. But I want to ask another question that we didn't prepare and we hadn't scripted, which is basically generating new business from cold. A lot of people say cold outreach is dead. Doesn't work. Cold outreach is pointless. What's your point of view? Matt first.
We're rumble. That's the end of it. Thanks very much for your time.
Yeah, and it's been nice seeing you guys. Thank you.
Hopefully you wouldn't see
It's changed beyond all recognition. You know, we looked at things like how effective using the phone was as a first point of contact. And Matt, you did some measurement on how many calls it was taking to have one conversation with a decision maker. And once the world shifted to work from home, there was about a 3-month period where you could get through to people for fun because their office line was just forwarded to their mobile. It was glorious. And then all of a sudden that changed and their PA was back in the mix and the receptionists were back in the mix, but they were 35 miles away from their boss. So getting through became much more challenging. And we did some measurement and found it had gone from around 50 calls to have one significant conversation, which is already a tough day, to 410 calls to have one significant conversation. Now, I've been told by a few people who use the phone primarily that situation has improved a bit, but they still were saying it's a couple of hundred. We've spoken to a couple of people who are getting through every 5th or 6th call, but they're exclusively calling people's mobiles, which every time I said, does that get people's backs up? They kind of shift uncomfortably in their seat, because I think the answer is, yeah, of course it does.
Absolutely.
You know, your mobile, unless it's your work mobile, which maybe.
I don't answer. If it rings with a number I don't recognize now, I simply don't answer.
Yeah. So the phone is a really tough thing to use as a first point of contact. Having the kind of confidence and skill to use it as a second or third conversation, 100%. Of course it has its use. If someone says, yeah, your timing's not bad, give me a call, being ready to do that, that's great. You know, I'm the sort of person I'll quite happily just, if an agency replies to us and says, yeah, chat would be good, I'm itching to get on the phone to them and just start talking, and rather than emailing back and forth. Email has become obviously very saturated. However, because of things like Apollo making it extremely easy to bang together a list of 20,000 prospects, and then every AI tool on earth happily writing terrible emails for you full of M-dashes, Zs and Americanizations.
Yep.
So many agencies have huge email campaigns running. The inboxes are kind of flooded. That said, if you can write a subject line that genuinely gives away the fact that you're a human, that shows a bit of humility, that shows a little bit of wit and intelligence and awareness, and respects the person's kind of time and the position they have, you can get people to look at your emails. And if you can then get them to look at your emails, that first couple of sentences, that's where you can get the work done. And open rates are okay. Response rates are lower than they've ever been. But when you do get a response, it tends to be really good. You don't get the fluffy responses in it. You don't get that, oh, yeah, let's have a chat. You get the people that say, fair enough, I like your email, let's have a chat. Your timing's good. Because you have to hit the nail on the head. LinkedIn. You can do some really solid stuff with LinkedIn, and I'm not going to give away our secrets. We charge lots of money for them, but there's stuff you can do on LinkedIn where it isn't annoying. You know, the thing that people hate is the pitch slapping. I don't like the term. It sounds unnecessarily violent, but when you connect with someone, we all do it. You kind of go, yeah, all right, I'll connect. And you kind of almost flinch waiting for the immediate sales message to ping up. And when it doesn't, that's quite a nice thing. And when the person turns out to be a human and engages with you in a way that shows that actually, no, this is a real little business connection I've made here. It's very subtle and almost subconscious, but it's a really nice way to be on someone's radar. And then you make the LinkedIn outreach work with your email outreach, and suddenly it looks like a company that's genuinely interested and probably more interested than your current agency seems. So there's definitely ways to continue doing cold outreach. The biggest problem is that when someone decides, yeah, all right, I'll have a look at your email, and they click through to your LinkedIn page or your website or wherever they decide to go first, and it just doesn't keep up the story. It doesn't look compelling. It doesn't look interesting, largely for the reasons we talked about in your first question.
Exactly.
That's the big problem, because cold outreach isn't ever going to stop working. It's daft to suggest that any of us never get a sales email that we don't go, all right, fair enough. You know, it happens. It's rare, but it always has been. Same as sales calls to your house. You know, when I started Sponge, when we used to train people used to panic about phoning people. And I used to say, you know, when the phone rings in your house and it's a sales call, 99 times out of 100, you just politely or rudely or whatever, but you end the call. But about 1 in 100, you kind of go, yeah, fair play. And you get off the phone and you turn to whoever's in the room and you say, well, we're not buying a conservatory, but if we were, that was really good. And then you get back on with your evening and it's fine. Those people got it right. They appeared to be a human in a world where everyone just sounded like a sales robot and had watched Wolf of Wall Street and thought that was a sales manual. And it's the same with outreach now. You've got to understand that these people's emails inboxes are absolutely saturated, and that's your competition. The competition is no longer other agencies. They're not getting through. They're just writing AI nonsense. Nothing wrong with AI as a tool, but using it to do everything is wrong. And so your competition is the person's attention, that 3 seconds they need to give you to read your email. So it's definitely changed. And if you haven't reacted to it, then you're in a real tough spot. If you've decided, I'm just also going to bang out 20,000 emails and let AI write it, you aren't going to make any headway at all.
You aren't.
And much like new business, certainly for cold outreach has always been, it's inefficient. Compared to referrals, compared to warm leads that arrive in your inbox because they tripped over you and saw your website and loved you, cold outreach converts at a much, much lower rate from meeting to win. But that's always been the case.
Yeah.
Yet, if you look at the Campaign Magazine top 20 new business rankings for the big ad agencies, they're all the ones with a decent-sized new biz team constantly doing outreach, going networking, looking for referrals, asking for introductions, warming up those warm leads from 3 years ago. Cold outreach is kind of all of those things in many ways. And, Matt mentioned earlier about exclusively doing cold outreach. We now see going after those referrals and chasing up those old warm leads as a big part of cold outreach.
So, Matt, what's your view?
I've forgotten the question, but my answer is yes, mostly.
Excellent. Good. But sometimes no, Matt. Occasionally it's no.
Occasionally it's no, but it really depends what I'm feeling at the time.
It does.
Is cold outreach dead, Matt? That was the question.
I have nothing really to add. Steve, no, clearly it isn't, otherwise we wouldn't exist.
Exactly.
It has changed shape to a degree. COVID did us a favor and then it pushed us out of the old ways. Because when I got involved with Sponge to start with, a lot of my job was just kind of almost like as an external consultant. Stephen didn't ask for it. It just sort of happened because I would start off asking questions, how do you do this? And then it turned into why do you do this? And when we started looking at the efficacy of phone calls, who was making the best calls, how much research were we doing before the calls, how much time was it taking? It was just clear that we needed to shake things up a bit. But I think we were both quite reluctant to really take that plunge. But then COVID forced it on us, and then we actually did okay through COVID. And the other thing it did was it allowed us to increase the volumes of things like the email outreach so that we could genuinely look at that amount of data and feel confident there was enough data that any conclusions we would draw from it would be accurate. So we always say even to clients of ours where they've already got a history of doing their own new business, they might have done quite a bit, but they won't do anything like the volume we do. So we can properly A/B test the hell out of anything we can think of, subject line or whatever it is. And then the amount of work Steve has put in the last year and a half, 2 years on LinkedIn, I started off quite reluctant to see how much time was going into that. But now we're starting to see that actually it's changed and people have responded to the amount of time gone into it. So it's still there. I think you just have to be ready to adapt. We've had, even in the last 5 years, various different ways of sourcing our data, building our own lists, the way that we outreach, the volumes that we push out, the way we monitor it. All of those things have changed radically. But no, cold channels still works, and obviously we wouldn't exist, and we've got clients that have been with us for years, so we're clearly turning in enough results that they're happy with it. And I did point out to Steve, once I actually got my head round the whole new business thing, is it's a fundamentally flawed sector in that even when you're doing really well for a client, they will think that you're doing rubbish.
They will.
Compared to the world they know,
correct,
you're hardly turning up with anything. It's only if they saw what the norm was for results in new business that they realize that actually we do a pretty good job. But it's really hard to keep your chin up in this industry when even when you're doing really well, clients will give up after 7 months because they haven't all bought gold-plated helicopters and they thought this was going to be their way to, riches. Yep. It's a tough apple, but there is still some bite in it.
So, second question, and then we'll do a couple of minutes on this one, and then I'd like to just wrap up with the reasons clients hire and fire agencies. So just quickly on differentiation, it's a big topic. So let's just keep it to maybe a couple of minutes. Differentiation for an agency. Clearly it's not that you've got the best people or methodology, because bluntly, everyone says that. In this market, what are your kind of insights, experiences of how do you truly differentiate as an agency in this market, which is very noisy? Matt first.
Well, actually, it's easy because I've kind of already said it, is that the differentiation is to base your identity on your results, because you're not going to have the smartest people. You will have smart people.
Yeah.
They're arguably not the smartest, or they arguably are, but it's an argument. Your skills, your technology, your IP, whatever it is all of those things aren't really very important in that conversation. Is that the way you differentiate yourself is to make sure that you focus on the stuff that is different about you. If you're the guys that picked up the Red Ball account, then make sure you talk about Red Ball and what you did for them and why you were chosen and what results you achieved. Is again, it's the same question as the beginning one, which is just that's how you make sure that people see you as different, as they see the company you keep, the companies that have selected you to be their partners, and the results you've had on their business, not the work you've done for them, but the results that the work had on them. And that's really my simple answer, because what else are you going to do? Otherwise, you have got to pick on all those boring tangibles of how many people, how many years. We got a 600-year combined experience. Well, is that good? Is that bad? Does that have
Exactly.
value? How many awards have you got? How many did you pay for? How many tables of 10 at some awards gala did you do? Those things are all questionable. Stick to the stuff that can't be questioned, unless you're lying, in which case don't lie. But other than that, stick to the facts.
Brilliant. Steve.
Very similar, alluding to the fact that you understand there are commercial outcomes is a powerful differentiator. And it's in a world where, in fact, a lot of buyers or decision makers aren't necessarily looking for something unique. Actual uniqueness isn't that an attractive a thing, because either you've got to be completely educated on what it is, or there isn't a line in the budget for it in the first place. There needs to be points of familiarity. It needs to be an agency offering that's relevant to what you need to get done, and one that looks similar to those that you've had before, so that your organization can actually operate the agency and work with them. But the real differentiator, if you want something that's actually useful to both parties, is always going to be outcomes related. And just to give you a very short story, we used to work with a big design and branding agency, and they had a named process for their branding thing. And I'm not going to name it because it will give away who they are. But I outright refused to talk about this thing, and they threatened to pull the contract unless we talked about it in every communication with a prospect. So I said I would. And of course I didn't. And then I won them a nice big project with a large financial organization, and it was worth about £400,000. And I got called to a meeting with the agency, and they told me how amazing it was that as soon as I started talking about this branding process of theirs, look at this win that came in. And I had to explain that I'd never once mentioned it. And I actually used to talk about a company working in the sewage industry that they used to work for, that they'd done a really good job for and massively grown through an incredible branding program that transformed the company, and never once mentioned the process that got there. I mentioned the difference they made to that sewage company. And that was really it for me. It was one of the first times that I really kind of put it all in one place and realized that those outcomes were incredibly powerful. And in fact, you mentioned Andy Bounds. Not long after that, I read The Jelly Effect, and it backed up everything I'd been doing in such a lovely way.
Yeah. And that's really well put. In my old profession in procurement, I never awarded a contract to someone because they had the best methodology. It's a ludicrous idea, frankly. But the results they can deliver for us at an adequate level of risk, yeah. I never bought the cheapest. I can't think of a time when I ever bought just the cheapest. It's not about that. It's about the value you're going to generate. Anyway, moving on to the last topic. So let's close off with the reasons clients hire and fire agencies. Tales from the client side.
Well, that's yours, go? Matt. That's yours, Matt. I don't have any client side stories.
You can wrap up the show with that as a succinct reason. Why do clients hire and fire?
Is he allowed to use a rude word because we got told off by a client for telling the story I think he's going to tell?
The simple answer is it depends.
Of course.
That's the point, is that I've hired talent or agencies when I had a really small budget. I was given maybe some real Z-list game to publish, and they went, you can have a couple of grand. Good luck. And I would blow it all on photography, because I know if I got some good photography, I could send it around some magazines and I would get some coverage and they would hail me as a PR expert. Right. Other times it might be that I was looking for an agency and I had a big budget, but I didn't have much time. So I might literally look at who recently had my competitors hired, who had they used, which agency had they chosen, and maybe I would be lazy enough to go, good enough for Sony, good enough for me. Or I might have had other times where I had the luxury of time and budget, and I might get 6, maybe 8 agencies to come in on one day, and we would sit in our boardroom and just roll them in and out and take a real look at everything. So it's really hard to say what the reasons are, because without understanding the person doing the hiring and what their motivations are, it's why I always used to say, coming back, and I'm sort of focusing on the same points. But if you understand what my problems are, then you will probably do a much better pitch because you won't be so focused on yourselves. You'll be focused on me. So if I'm stressed out, I've got 45 minutes, turn up on time, get straight to it, and be wrapped up in 45 minutes because there's another agency coming in. And if you're the guys that slow down my day, I'm just not going to hire you because you've proven that you can't stick to a simple brief when it comes to pitching, let alone
exactly.
So it's really hard to say. And the other thing that Steve has alluded to is because sometimes somebody that's hiring an agency is spoiled for choice. Lots of really talented agencies out there, all of their bodies of work, very impressive. The results they've achieved, inarguable. It might just be that I don't want to have to keep checking in with a dickhead once a week and listen to some bloke called Quentin who comes into work, is 45, he wears a baseball cap backwards and comes to work on a skateboard. I don't want that in my life. I just want to have a nice, easy life, come into work, have lunch, get some work done, go home, put my slippers on, fire up the PlayStation. Is like what gets me there. If I've got to deal with really long-winded idiots where there's 20 people, I've had people in rooms screw up the ball, we throw the ball to each other. Okay, it's like this. There's no such thing as a bad idea. And I'm like, that's bullshit because those three guys had dreadful ideas.
Yeah.
So I think that's the thing is you've got to tune into your prospect. If you turn up, I mean, we would talk about if we were dealing with law firms or if we were dealing with creative firms, is that you've got to change our persona. I'm going to wear a shirt if I go into a big law firm. If I'm going to guys who wear baseball caps backwards, I'm worried that my wardrobe's too old and I look like an idiot. So you've got to be a bit of a chameleon. But that's the truth of it is you've just got to be the most appealing in the room. And it's unlikely to come down to your skills because all the people that survived are skilled.
Yep.
So I'm afraid to say there's no simple truth in my answer. It's just about being smart, being adaptable, and being aware, being more than self-aware. It's being aware of your client and what their needs are. How knackered are they looking? How much time have they got? Ask sensible questions. I always say to people, how quickly are you looking to make a decision?
Yeah.
I go, oh, next week. Because if they go, oh, not at all, I'm just kicking the tires. Well, so I think, it's down to you as the smart one that is going after the work to ask the smarter questions because they're just going to ask you how you can help them sell more boxes.
Exactly. So think about them and their problem.
Yeah.
Focus on the results that you can deliver and that you have delivered before and be the most memorable agency at the end of all of the pitches.
And memorable is so hard to define because it might be you, the guys where you go, do you know what? If once a month we go down the pub with them and have a catch up, that'd be good for us. If it's people where you go, oh my God, it's Quentin on the phone.
Yeah, exactly.
I can hear his
run away,
around in the background.
run away.
Then you just go, I don't want it. So yeah, is memorable is a very hard thing to define, but make sure that you are the one that hits the nail on the head as close as possible to what they are looking for. And that might be across a range of things. And feel free to ask those questions. Who are you looking for? What kind of people are you looking to be involved in? Make sure that you just give yourself a chance to actually hit those buttons.
Have you got any criteria? If you haven't, help the client make some.
Yeah.
Very good. Matt, Steve, it's been amazing. Thank you ever so much for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
It's been really, really good. Really, really good. So where can people find out more about you?
If you go to www.spongenb, as in novemberbravo.com, or find me on LinkedIn, it's just linkedin.com/spongenb, I think.
Very good. Excellent. Thanks, guys. Been really enjoyable. Yeah, it's been a real pleasure. So I will talk to you both soon.
Thanks for having us. Yeah, cheers. Bye.
Thanks for listening to Higgle, the B2B Sales Club podcast series with your host, Mike Lander. Please subscribe so that you'll catch all the next episodes.